I just have a slightly open question for Eliza. So, just for people's information, one of the things that went into the planning of this conference was I was very inspired by Eliza's Benjamin Boyce video, where she spoke about the missing middle at W path and E path. And I just think it's such a fantastic point. I'd like you to explain what you meant by that to everyone so they can hear it.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right. So I went to the WPATH conference in Montreal back in September, and it was about as unlike this conference as you can imagine. And I would say that the thing that was the most difficult about it was that it unfolded on these two levels, and one of them was this very abstract level of there was this kind of world historical battlefield between the forces of good and evil, between transphobia and affirmation. And then there was the level of this incredibly technical level of like surgical technique. And how do you take a boy whose puberty has been blocked and create a fake vagina out of too little tissue? A session that they had right before lunch, by the way. But the point, let's not talk about it more. The point is that there was nothing in between these two levels. There was nothing in between the abstract and the technical, and that meant that there was no human level. There was nobody asking, why would people want to do this? There was nobody asking, is it ethical for us to provide this under the banner of medicine? And that was the thing that made it so hard, and that's why I'm so glad that we've had the last few days together here.
That's lovely. Hello, my name is Cian Brady. I'm from Killarney. I'm with the Parental Rights Alliance. And I have a question. I raised it briefly with Isolde yesterday at the bar. If we, and this is, I suppose it's somewhat simplistic, if we take it that a man who's born a man can never become a woman, can there be any healing therapeutic outcome where the treatment is some affirmation-based treatment, whether it's medical, whether it's psychotherapy or psychological? Because I think Stella, yes, you might have mentioned there was maybe 3 possible outcomes, and one was them living as a trans or as presenting in the other sex from which they were born. I'm just wondering, is there a good therapeutic outcome whereby it's based on somewhat a false premise? If that makes sense, thank you.
Do you want to take that?
Well, I mean, I don't believe that it's therapeutic to be cut off from reality, because, like I said in my paper, I think that's maladaptive. So I worked with a trans-identifying young person, and she said something like, well, even if I'm not trans-masc, then I'm definitely non-binary because I'm definitely not a female. And I was like, wait a minute. Actually, and it was like a revelation to her that I was telling her she was a female, and then she went to the gender clinic, and the gender clinic was really upset that I had told her that. But, you know, I believe that this young person did go on to transition, but maybe she went on to transition knowing that she's female. And yes, I think there are some people who choose to live in the opposite sex role, and that can be adaptive, but it's very unlikely to be adaptive if you're trying to, as Corinna said earlier, always reach the other side, the other bank of the river that you're never going to get to.
There seems to be, I can see some hands.
There's Marcus has his hand up.
Hi. I'm just thinking about the fact that this is for Lisa. GIDS is going to close, and there's going to be a lot of young people with quite severe mental health issues as well as gender dysphoria that need quite practical risk assessment support. I think that local CAMS services all over the UK are going to need to get skilled up to support these young people, realistically. I was wanted to know how you worked with the suicidal detransitioner, and from a risk assessment point of view, did you have support from the local mental health service, or is that something the work that you would do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's sort of 2 questions, like what can what can therapists do, and then how did that work out, and what did I do? And I was really worried about this young person, and yet there was so much that she was doing that clearly she was trying not to do that. She really was making a lot of efforts, and I just kind of had to trust. And honestly, it sort of boiled down to our relationship. She got very intensely attached to me right away, and frankly, I got really attached to her too. And that had a downside, but I think in the immediate term, it probably was really helpful in terms of that. The answer is just really kind of good old-fashioned basic therapy, which I know, Stella talks about this a lot. Like, you're a skilled therapist, you can work with these people because it's this gender exceptionalism, that this is somehow different from everything else. It just doesn't make sense. So I hope that answered your question.
Hi, I'm Jana London. I'm founder of the Natural Women's Council, and I work with 3 other activist groups, including Parents' Rights Alliance, who I met today. And there's so many beautiful therapists and medical experts in the room to talk about how we can help the young people on the back end. But what I'd like to do is ask a question on what I can do as a mum of a 4-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl and an activist to kind of stop some of this from influencing children on the front end. I've created this little drawing of an 8-legged octopus, and things are coming at our kids in schools. I've just got a teacher's guide to the new SPHE. Ireland has gone off its head. We talked about there's a gender person. My little child's going to learn in school about the gender person, and that my little boy is the genderbread man. My little boy is going to start junior infants, and he's going to get the genderbread, and he's going to learn that he can become a little girl. And as a 5-year-old boy, I'm not prepared to put him into that indoctrination camp. So what can I do as a mother and a campaigner to stop it on the front end, to have less children see all of you therapists on the back end? I have a few thousand flyers going to print this week, so I'll take some notes on that answer.
You want to do it, Stella?
Oh. I certainly didn't expect that I'd be answering this. I think that we have an awful lot of influence on our children, and we are, as Lisa always says, we are the world authority on our own children. You know your children, you know their where they might get lost and their vulnerabilities, and I think the parents who are worried about that today are not in the vulnerable place of 10 years ago, the other parents who we've heard about who didn't know where the danger was. It's such a significantly safer place to know, there are like pitfalls here and there's issues here, because there's always been, every single era has had issues to kind of contend with as we're raising children. And so it's an issue to contend with, but oh my God, we're in such a stronger place when we know people here know what we're contending with. 10 years ago, the parents didn't know that this was going to happen. They didn't know where it was coming from, and they were kind of blindsided in a way that you won't be. So I think you're more protected than you think you are.
I'm just not going to send them to school or get them any tablets.
Yeah,
Exactly.
keep them off the internet.
Right.
Oh yeah, and the internet.
I was just going to say 3 lovely papers. I hope you're going to publish, and you can manage to get the papers published. I was thinking about, when you were talking, Eliza, about this sort of the sort of prohibitions against thought and doubt, which I'm very familiar with our patients. It's a bit like when you used to work on psychiatric wards and the anorexic patient would make the nurses feel like food was poison. Because you've got the external gang, and then as Rosenfeld, a psychoanalyst, used to talk about the internal gang, which, if you're loyal to it, it's going to offer you all sorts of protection against the pain of life. And then you get this corrupt situation whereby reality, thought, and psychological pain, which comes with reality and thought, are seen as the enemy. And anyone representing that, and parents are often in this position of trying to talk about their concerns, and it's treated like it's poison. And that creates a great problem for therapists. It creates a great problem. And the thing I hadn't thought about is the heroic journey. That the sort of idealisation, it's almost like a sort of erotic novel. You know, you're going to suffer through pain on this heroic journey, which I hadn't sort of thought about before. The other thing that there's one other thing that I thought that run through all the papers is the theme, not of psychiatric mania, but of sort of mood mania. Mm-hmm. There's so much mania involved, and we talked about pushing through gates and people putting. One patient said that she felt she had her foot on the accelerator all the time. And how the professions have joined in with that mania. Yes. We're now gods. We can literally change people's sexes. We're involved in some sort of delusion. And the sort of underlying fear of ordinary depression, which we was talking about on the panel, that we all have to face when we're faced with our limitations and difficulties and faults. And there's no room to support ordinary sadness about our limitations and even our aggression and our guilt about the harm we do to ourselves and other people. But thanks very much. Lovely papers. Thank you.
Thank you.
What would you like to comment?
I wanted to ask a question about shame. You're going to have to indulge me. I'm an Irish woman of a certain age, so this will be familiar. Lisa, Joe, and Eliza all spoke on some level about shame, and I'm really interested in the shame that people feel, the shame that people in this room have been made feel about saying no and challenging, and then the total absence of shame in people who push things that are unethical. And I'm not even sure what the question is, but I'm fascinated by this idea that some of us feel shame so intensely and it stops us from saying stop. And then other people don't feel it at all and they can do terrible harm. And I don't know, I don't know what it is. I'm not a psychologist. I'm fascinated by it.
I have a bunch of thoughts about that.
Yeah, we're vying for this.
I would say the people pushing these fanatical things apparently feel no shame. And I think you really have to look in terms of defensive structures and the projection of shame into other people so that they don't have to face their own shame, their own sense of internal damage. I think we see this most vividly in the trans right activist profile, in which they are constantly attacking and humiliating and degrading other people as a characterological defense, so they don't have to deal with their own damage and their own despair, their own deep, profound depression. What I'm talking about is core shame. And the one other thing I'd like to add is that we live in this odd moment in which it seems we're trying to take the stigma and shame out of everything, every single thing, except for what people who disagree with us believe. You know, that's the only place in which it's preserved. And we try and shame and humiliate anybody who disagrees with us, but nothing else can be shamed, you know. You know, you're a fatphobe, you're a transphobe, you're a kinkphobe. Everything is supposed to be okay except for disagreement.
If I can just hop on really quickly to what you were saying about destigmatization and shame. One of the things that I think is so interesting is that there's a great deal of energy being expended to remove the shame from things that are often quite bad for the people who do them or for the rest of us. And at the same time and there's also pushing back on the shame that it often attaches to mental illness, which I think is largely needed. But one of the things that is getting lost in this is we seem to be losing a language for the shame that young people often feel when they're going through puberty and adolescence, and the difficulties that young people who are same-sex attracted feel when they're coming to terms with their sexual orientation. And so it's online in particular, it's so often the discourse is your struggles are totally valid unless you're a girl, or a girl hitting puberty, or unless you're gay. And I think that is a big driver of trans, because the kids feel the shame, and the message is that they're not supposed to feel shame about those things. And so there's something wrong if they do.
There's an awful lot to say about this. I think about the word guilt and I think about the word shame. And often, guilt can propel us to behave better. So you might feel guilty because you missed your mother's birthday, or you didn't behave well. And so if you are, emotionally courageous, you can meet your guilt and realize I didn't cover myself with glory there, and I need to behave a little bit better. But if you aren't morally courageous, guilt can, as far as I can see, I'm sure other people will say it better, but guilt can actually be almost hijacked, turned into shame, and become incredibly corrosive and self-destructive. And the guilt was an opportunity for a better self. And shame jumps in, stops that, and becomes incredibly self-destructive and corrosive. And that opportunity was missed. So, I am also a woman of a certain age from Ireland. Mm-hmm. And, we talked a lot about guilt as well as shame. And shame is everywhere, but guilt isn't spoken about so often. And I do think we need to give some attention to it, maybe.
Hello, Julian again. So, as I'm listening to this, I'm remembering a quote from Ben Shapiro: "Feelings are not facts, and facts don't care about your feelings," of which I wholeheartedly agree. And people just don't like it when you force them to face reality or to think about things in higher resolution. And, the example with a friend of mine who I've known for nearly a decade, she now identifies as non-binary. And when I challenged her on that, she got increasingly offended and was very hurt, and basically has shut me out since last year, wrote me a long message explaining how hurt and how offended she was. And I would think to myself, so how, short of not saying anything at all, would have been acceptable to you? If you're saying, oh, well, you shouldn't have said it that way, I'm like, well, then how should I have said it? That I just find that people often use the excuse that, oh, you picked the wrong time, you picked the wrong place, you picked the wrong words, you picked the wrong tone. To me, it's a cop-out of saying, well, I just don't want to hear what you have to say. It also says to me that you're not intellectually sophisticated enough to process a message independent of the messenger, its delivery, and whatever emotions that might evoke. What are your thoughts?
I have nothing to say.
I think you're right. I think, people have a hard time with reality. I'm going to sort of pick up on what Marcus was saying a minute ago, which I think is just, we've sort of been talking about it the whole time. Coming to terms with the reality requires giving up the manic defense, this kind of inflated belief of omnipotence, and to achieve what we psychoanalysts call the depressive position. And it's not fun. And I think as a culture, we're kind of stuck in this manic defense where we don't want to come to terms with reality. So when that comes up in social situations, I don't know, I usually just excuse myself.
Okay, this is our last question from Carrie.
Am I in?
Our second last, apparently.
Second last? Okay, I'll just make more of a comment as a representative of the healthcare system from the U.S., which obviously I'm extremely ashamed. It's not for my behavior, but how other doctors have behaved. And I just wanted to give a couple insights that I saw as I was practicing during the flood of opioids. I saw doctors just writing prescriptions because they didn't want to confront patients. There's also a disconnect between the people writing prescriptions and seeing the overdoses and the destroyed lives in the ER. And I never occurred to me to ever write a prescription or do anything unethical. But no one had my back. And at that time, I realized the healthcare system was extremely screwed up. So what's going on now is similar to that. And you also have to understand in the US, doctors' salaries and bonuses structures are tied to patient experience survey scores.
Yep.
So there's an alignment between these people are not going to say no. Okay, they're not like me. Like I took a decrease in my salary because I would never write a prescription that was inappropriate. But you see what happened. So that thinking about
institutions, that's a policy change that should happen in the US. There never should be a doctor's salary tied to a consumer, how much they like their experience. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. It's so true.
It's scary.
I just wanted to add a comment to the original question about what to do with our younger children and younger parents. My name is Kate Goon, and I've been working with parents for the last year and a half for GenSpect. And I really think we're starting to break through on how to be preventative and proactive. And one of the things I'm seeing parents do that is very successful is they're not focusing on teaching their children what to think. They're teaching their children how to think critically and how to ask questions. And then they're also modeling it in their interactions with any adult authority figure that child interacts with. So any other family friend, teacher, counselor, anyone, they show them, they ask the questions that need to be asked of that adult authority figure.